Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer DeCristoforo, the president of the Chinese and American Friendship Association of Maine, and welcome to our program today, From Suffering to Celebration, an intimate look at San Francisco's Chinatown. Our wonderful author presenters today are photographer Dick Evans and journalist Kathy Chin Leong. Dick Evans, the creator of the project, spent 3 years taking over 5,000 photos to capture the essence of this community. During that time, he partnered with Kathy Chin Leong, a Chinese American writer who has covered Chinatown for the New York Times. She conducted more than 100 interviews with Chinatown leaders, residents, and business owners. I'm sure they will share a bit more about themselves too as part of their story about the book. During today's talk, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box and they will answer them after the presentation. Marjorie Collins, also on our Cathian board, is here with us and she will help navigate the questions. This project is a nonprofit venture and all book revenues go to the Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco and Heyday Books, two nonprofit organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to start out with a brief trailer pertaining to the book. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today and hope you enjoy the presentation. Well, great. Now that we've gotten started, we will turn over the talk to Dick and Kathy.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer, and thanks to you and Marjorie Collins and Shannon Briggs for organizing this event with the Chinese American Friendship Association of Maine. We're absolutely delighted to be sharing some about San Francisco's Chinatown with our friends in Maine. And I did check the weather on Google to see that it's a pretty nice day at least in Portland, Maine. So thank you for taking 90 minutes out of your spring day and joining us here. So now that you saw the trailer and saw a synopsis of what's in the book, Kathy and I would like to share a few of our favorite images and some of the stories that came out of the Chinatown Book Project. This first image that you see, it very well could be in China as you look at it. I mean, it looks very typically Chinese. it also, for those of us who have visited Chinatown, it's what we probably think of when we think of Chinatown. This is Grant Avenue. It's the main street that runs through Chinatown uh, from north to south. And it's also one of the oldest streets in San Francisco, by the way. And it's the heart of Chinatown. You see the red lanterns, you see some of the architecture and the buildings there. Um, there are some other images that give you a picture of what Chinatown looks like today. This is on the cover. This is actually the facade of one of those buildings right on Grant Avenue. And it used to house a famous restaurant called the Four Seas. But today it only has a sign for the Four Seas, but inside is actually quite a new restaurant that's a Michelin starred restaurant called Mr. Jew's by restaurateur Brandon Jew, who's really made a name for himself. But you can see that typical architecture. Here you see the pagoda rooftops that are on a lot of the buildings that line Grant Avenue, and also the very traditional street lamps. Now, most of us think that this is the way Chinatown always was. It was founded in the mid 1800s, around 1850, and then grew extremely rapidly in the next 10 or 20 years due to the gold rush and then the railroad expansion. So thousands of Chinese immigrants poured into San Francisco. And most people think, well, that's the way that the architecture came about. It came from China. The immigrants built buildings as they knew them from China. But that's not at all true. And it's, in fact, the first 50 years or more of Chinatown, it was really pretty much a ghetto, low-rise housing, unsanitary conditions, not at all an attractive place to live. Very crowded, very populated. But everybody in the San Francisco area knows, and I'm sure a number of you there in Maine know as well, that something significant happened to San Francisco in 1906. And that, of course, was the major earthquake that destroyed much of downtown San Francisco, started a number of fires that pretty much destroyed the rest. And Chinatown was located right in downtown San Francisco. And of course, so its buildings were largely destroyed by the earthquake and or burned. And following that, the city leaders saw an opportunity to maybe force the Chinese immigrants to the outskirts of the city and to force them to start over out there. But they were very insistent and very resilient and pushed back with that, and finally reached an agreement with the city leaders that Chinatown would be rebuilt as both a residential community, but also as a tourist attraction. So that's where all of this elegant architecture comes from. It was actually designed mostly by Caucasian architects based on pictures and what they had seen of Chinese architecture, with some input from Chinese architects, and by Caucasian builders as well, who controlled the building trades, of course, at that point. So what we all think of as historic Chinatown is actually a rendition of what architects, Caucasian architects and builders thought Chinatown should look like. And that was all done in the 10 years following the earthquake. Now, during the period that the immigrants first came to Chinatown, they were not particularly well welcomed. They were there to work, as I mentioned, in the gold mines, the railroads, and the businesses that supported that. But they were discriminated against in many ways. They were prevented from filing gold claims. They were limited to where they could live to a certain confined area. They were limited in terms of what jobs they could have or not have. And in 1882, that reached perhaps a symbolic peak when there was a act actually called the Chinese Exclusion Act. I think somebody has their microphone on because I heard some background noise. If you could please be
Hey,
sure to mute your
Marjorie,
microphone.
would you mind muting your sound? Thank you.
Great.
Great.
So anyway, as I was saying, Chinatown began with a history of discrimination. And then after the earthquake, that still continued. And in fact, Chinese immigrants were then being channeled through Angel Island, which was the embarkation point for the Chinese coming into the United States on the West Coast. And this is interesting in that a number of the Chinese were in detention centers there, and it could take weeks or months or even a couple years before they finally got cleared to come in. And many of them carved poems, sayings, names on the walls, on the wooden walls, the bare wooden walls there. And this is just one of thousands of those that were carved in the walls, and then later, just a few decades ago, were documented and recorded. But this one's quite powerful, I think. It says, everybody's got a number. I think my number is 80340. They would put your number on the blackboard and you would know you have to go to interrogation or a health checkup. They did not use names. On the day that they let you go, your number is on the blackboard and it says San Francisco. And if you see the name down, that was a young man, 11 years old. And that was as late as 1939 when they were still being detained. And the discrimination, the overt discrimination, really didn't change until the 1950s. And of course, even with that, there have been more subtle forms of discrimination. Now, of course, Chinatown has evolved, and although it has not forgotten its roots in social justice. And there are two statues now in Chinatown that very much speak to that and speak to much more contemporary events that we all know about. This one is a replica of the Goddess of Democracy statue, which was built by the students in Tiananmen Square in 1989. And if you saw those news reports live from Tiananmen Square, you may remember this huge wood, cardboard, and paper statue in the center of Tiananmen Square. Well, later, a sculptor replicated 3 or 4 of these around North America, including this one, which is in the center of Portsmouth Square, and a reminder of social justice issues. And Portsmouth Square, I might add, is the central point of, and also called the heart of Chinatown. This is another important sculpture that is in Chinatown. It's called the Comfort Women. And it is a tribute to the young women from China, Korea, and the Philippines who were conscripted or enslaved as sex slaves by the Japanese government and army during World War II. And of course, many of them died during that period. Some survived, but it's been, of course, a major political issue between China, Korea, the Philippines, and Japan for all the decades since World War II. Well, this one was put up in Chinatown, and a tribute to those young women. It actually created a bit of an uproar with San Francisco's sister city, Osaka, to the extent that the relations between Osaka and San Francisco were broken off after decades. And hopefully that will get resolved in the years to come and again be a friendly association, because it was a very healthy, very good relationship for many decades. So this is all just a reminder that Chinatown in San Francisco remains very aware of discrimination, social justice, and of course, with the latest events of the COVID-19 epidemic, pandemic, and the discrimination that's come from that, and the violence against Asians that has been fostered by that, is a very stark reminder that that discrimination still exists and is very much an issue to deal with. Now, in the course of putting together the Chinatown book, I think Jennifer mentioned that I took over 5,000 photos, but at the same time, Kathy was doing over 100 interviews. And in some cases, we did the photo shoots and the interviews together. But I'd like to turn it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about some of her interviews and her reactions from the book project.
Thank you, Dick. Thanks, everybody. This is one of our favorite murals. It's over 5 feet tall and over 20 feet long. And this was painted by James Leong. It's called 100 Years of Chinese in America. Now, this was criticized by the Chinese in Chinatown for reinforcing stereotypes, even though it was accurate historically. And the rejection hurt the artist so badly, he left America altogether and spent the remainder of his artistic career in Europe, where he was very successful. Now, this 7-panel mural was later lost, and it was recovered in a Chinatown recreation room where panels were actually used as a ping pong table. It was recovered, and now it's on permanent display at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum in Chinatown, San Francisco. And the great thing was James Leong, the original artist, returned to retouch the mural and was welcomed back with honor. In front of the James Leong mural on the left side is Susie, and she's an expert in Chinese American history. And so you might be wondering, what is the significance of her being in this picture? Well, she, like a detective, she recovered a set of 12 extremely rare watercolors by the late Jake Lee. Now, these original works depicted early Chinatown. Here, this one shows early Chinatown as a light industrial center. And these once hung in the elegant Khan's restaurant. And after Khan's was sold in the 1990s, all the paintings mysteriously disappeared until Sue hunted them down and recovered them all.
The biggest cultural event, of course, is Lunar New Year in Chinatown, just as it is in China and many Asian countries. And I believe your association, in fact, has had some Lunar New Year events, so you're quite familiar with it. This is an image from the Lunar New Year parade in San Francisco going through Chinatown. You see the lion dancer in front, and then you see the dragons behind. It's quite an event. It's been going on for decades. It's about a mile-long parade route. It's accompanied by all kinds of costumes, a lot of lion dancers, dragons, floats. A number of major commercial companies participate in it now, like Salesforce and Southwest Airlines. And it's a very festive event. It's also a popular one with student groups. Here again, you see, in fact, that's the image that's right behind me in my virtual background. You see the dragons going by and a few lions on the left. But as I was mentioning, it's very popular with students, as you see here carrying the dragons. Here's a couple young men, actually elementary school, so obviously 7th or 8th graders, painted in Monkey King costumes, and they're stilt walkers. They're on 5 or 6 foot high stilts. They traverse that whole mile-long route every year in costume. This happens to be from West Portal Elementary. It's not a school that's in Chinatown. It's in another section of San Francisco, probably 4 or 5 miles away, as is this young woman, also from West Portal, again, dressed up in costume. She's also a stilt walker. So it's quite an event to see them. But the West Portal Elementary has a fairly high Chinese immigrant population. And they celebrate every year by participating in costume as stilt walkers in the parade. This year, Chinese New Year has just passed, just a little over a month ago. There was no parade this year. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, because of the coronavirus pandemic, there's been no live parade. This year, they did quite a nice and elaborate virtual parade with highlights from all of the past events. And they did put, I think it was 11 or 12 of these zodiac symbols, like this one, all different and painted differently around the city of San Francisco, and encourage people to actually go to them rather than have them parade by the people, since the parade was not existing. Now, the Ox, for those that don't know, is noted for being trustworthy, honest, hardworking. And we're just hoping that some of those characteristics come through in 2021 as we open up, look to a brighter year. Another major event each year is a fall festival, the Moon Festival. And here you see the moon goddess and her moon god. She is actually a TV personality who hosts her own show in Chinese and has been the moon goddess for quite a number of years. Each year she swears she's going to retire from it, but she continues to do it. And as you can see, is very photogenic, very charismatic, and does a great job representing the Moon Festival every year.
Now today, if Bruce Lee were alive, he would be 80 years old. And before he came on the scene in the 1970s, Chinese males had no role models in the media. They were cast as houseboys or evil emperors, or white people played lead Chinese roles with taped eyes, speaking broken English in stereotypic accents. Now, Bruce Lee changed the life of Jeff Chin. And here on the left, when Jeff was a boy, he was picked on because he was Chinese. And then one night, after a particular difficult day in middle school, he looked at the Bruce Lee poster hanging on the wall of his bedroom, and he felt like the action hero was speaking to him, giving him hope. And he told Bruce he would make him proud. And since then, he has become the world's top collector of Bruce Lee memorabilia with more than 10,000 items, including the suit he wore in Enter the Dragon. And portions of his collection have traveled to museums around the world, including the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And I want to also mention that he was born in Chinatown. Here we're at Skylawn Memorial Park, the Ritz-Carlton of cemeteries in San Mateo. Every spring, Taoist priests and families come by the busload during Qingming, which is about now, to honor dead ancestors. Dick and I got a tour of the manicured premises with amazing vistas, and it was such a contrast. In the 1800s, Chinese could not be buried in the same cemeteries as whites, and they were pushed outside of San Francisco.
Kathy mentioned Bruce Lee and Kung Fu, of course, the martial arts. But another martial arts, of course, with the Chinese heritage is Tai Chi. And I would guess that a number of you may have done Tai Chi before, because it's quite popular now as a form of exercise. You certainly see people in the parks in San Francisco doing Tai Chi. And during the book project, we learned that there is an International Tai Chi Day every year. And so we partnered with the Chinese Culture Center and offered free tea and cookies to anybody that wanted to come out and do Tai Chi on the Kearny Street Bridge, connecting Portsmouth Square and the Chinese Culture Center on the other side. So as you could see from that prior picture, we got a number of people that came out, including one Tai Chi class, and others who just showed up for the tea and pastries and a free Tai Chi lesson. So we had a great time and were able to take some photos of them performing Tai Chi. Now, also during the course of the book project, we happened to meet this woman who is a Sifu, or a master of Tai Chi. Her name is Xu Fen Xiao. And she was the wife of an herbalist that we were photographing. And we just happened to see some big trophies up on top of his shelves of herbs, and we asked about them and discovered those were actually from Shu Fen's Tai Chi. So we asked if she would meet us around Chinatown and show us some Tai Chi poses, which, as you can see here, you can tell she's a master just from looking at this one. But we had a great time going around Chinatown and taking shots of her demonstrating Tai Chi at different spots.
We're here with the Tong family at Chinatown's, one of the oldest Chinatown banquet halls called the Far East Cafe that is barely open now, hanging on by a thread financially, but we're hoping it'll make it. At every red egg and ginger baby party for a 1-month-old, you have to have dyed red eggs to represent fertility and a plate of ginger, which represents energy and strength. And it's a great gathering. I think kids are the ones who love Chinese New Year the most. You typically give 2 red envelopes filled with 2 fresh bills for double happiness. Now, when a girl grows up and gets engaged, the bride-to-be will order a custom tailored cheongsam to wear for the wedding. Meanwhile, the wedding tea ceremony is a very treasured Chinese tradition, but fewer and fewer Chinese couples are honoring it. However, we found this couple, Liana and Michael Tang, and they are the exception. In this ceremony, they will present tea to their elders, and in turn, the parents and grandparents, one couple at a time, will offer them money and jewelry. Now, brides aren't the only ones who receive jewelry. Many times, an older woman will start handing down her Chinese heirlooms to her granddaughter, daughter, or daughter-in-law when she feels the time is right. In ancient times, people believed if you wore a 24-karat gold necklace or a jade bracelet, you would be protected from evil spirits. So Chinese jewelry is very unique in design and purpose. It's not just ornamental. Many believed it possessed powers and also has been used as money during times of war. This scene depicts everyday Chinatown life. Here you see a modern woman passing a traditional tailor shop, and she wears a traditional jade bracelet, probably from her mother or grandmother. And she's carrying a bag of good luck oranges and a box of bakery treats that represents a sweet life. This is my family sharing dim sum, otherwise known as going to yum cha. It's a common memory for many of us American-born Chinese. And little plates of chicken feet, steamed tripe, and gizzards are not exotic, but everyday dishes. But Dick did not try it. He tried the other stuff.
Chinatown is a close-knit community, as you might guess. It's physically pretty small, only about 25 square blocks. And it has a very strong community spirit, as you would guess. And one way to sort of get that feeling of that spirit is to walk through Portsmouth Square, which is the main park, and also, as I mentioned, called the heart of Chinatown, sometimes called the living room of Chinatown. And normally on a spring day, and this photo was taken just about this time of year, a couple of years ago, everybody will be out in the sunshine, playing cards, playing mahjong, reading newspapers. But this particular day, when I was out there to photograph the card games, it started to just pour. We got some really strong April spring showers. I figured the photo shooting was over, but everybody pulled out their umbrella, kept their hands. Nobody folded their cards. They just moved under the gate that protects the entrance to the bridge and continued the card game without skipping a beat. As you can see, the umbrellas out here. And as soon as the rain stopped and the sun came out again, they were back out playing cards again. But the, meeting together with friends, playing cards, here is an indoor activity on a weekend in Chinatown. where they're playing cards or mahjong or Chinese checkers or various games or reading papers. And people come from the outskirts and other parts of the city to their family association to see friends and family and just to get together. And there are quite a number of these family associations. I think Kathy's going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but just shows how strong the community spirit is. Now, here's a picture of Miss Chinatown, USA. And you might ask, why is there a Chinatown, USA when there's a Miss America and a Miss California pageant? Well, not too many decades ago, Chinese young women and girls were not allowed to participate in Miss Chinatown, or not Miss Chinatown, Miss America, and other pageants like this. So Chinatown developed its own pageant. And even though, fortunately, that's not at all the case anymore, you still see the annual pageant with a lot of pride. Here you see Catherine Wu, who was Miss Chinatown 2019, with some elementary students in a bilingual school. And one of her activities is to promote bilingualism at the schools around San Francisco. And she's very dedicated to that. But we also found out as we met her and got to know her well, she has another quite unique skill in that she is a world-class archer and in fact was hoping to go to the Olympics that year. And of course, the Olympics were canceled and postponed, so she did not get to go. But it was quite something to see her archery equipment, as you see here. If anyone's a bow hunter or an archer, look at that aluminum compound bow and the balancing stick that comes out of the front of it. This happens to be, we took shots of her around San Francisco at several different locations. There are other institutions within Chinatown that got their start, again, because Chinese immigrants were discriminated against. This happens to be the Chinatown YMCA, a very similar story. Decades past, Chinese were not allowed or encouraged to use Ys outside of Chinatown. So they developed their own, and it's a wonderful facility, very well supported, and one that's very treasured in the community today. And there are other cases as well. This is the donor wall for the Chinese hospital in Chinatown. And again, because of lack of access to medical care, the community started its own hospital. And then just a few years ago, they did a major fundraising and completely modernized it. It's a wonderful, very modern, terrific hospital now right in Chinatown. I think Kathy mentioned that Bruce Lee was born, of course, in the old version of this hospital, as was Kathy, by the way, we found out during the course of this.
Chinatown's the densest neighborhood outside of Manhattan. It's only 1/5 of a square mile and houses anywhere from 15 to 30,000 people. So imagine your home is the size of a closet shared with 4 or more people. This is single renter occupancy or SRO apartments. Here you have no access to washers and dryers, so you have to hand wash and hang your clothes outside to dry. You also share a restroom and kitchen with your neighbors. One of Chinatown's heroes is Reverend Norman Fong, and he's the former executive director of the Chinatown Community Development Center. And on the day of this photo shoot, a young lady who lived in the SRO building ran up to him and asked if he could visit her grandmother. Because his grandmother was too sick to walk down the stairs to visit the doctor, you know, these places have no elevators, the family wanted Reverend Fong to come and pray for her. So we were so blessed to be there to see him with compassion and tenderness as he took both her hands in his and whispered a prayer over her in Chinese. Now, from old to young, If you are on the Dragon Boat Racing team with the nonprofit Community Youth Center, all of your gear, all your practice time is free of charge. So thanks to CYC, the sport is truly transforming the lives of at-risk teens who might be tempted to join the wrong crowd. Bella Chen admits she was unathletic before joining the team, and now she's the team captain. Today, many Chinese children are proud of their heritage. Yuhan Chen, only 6 years old at this time, picks up a brush for the first time at this Chinese New Year event and finds out she really excels at calligraphy. And I followed up with the mother, and she said there was a teacher behind her at the same time. And here, my nephew, Tyler Pham, samples dragon beard candy. He's making a beard of his own. Dragon beard was originally a dessert of ancient Chinese emperors, made from a solid block of syrup and pulled to form thousands of strands. These colorful buildings are not just ornamental. They belong to family associations, and there's more than 200 of them in Chinatown. Back in the 1800s, if you landed in Chinatown, you would look up your association based on your village, your trade, or your last name. And the association would help you secure a job and a place to stay. Many of these association rooms often feature shrines. And note that these are private clubhouses. You cannot go inside or get a tour of them. Getting in to take pictures for this book was extremely rare. A play called King of the Yees, which was about family associations, came to San Francisco last year. It's traveled around the US. The comedy was written by Lauren Yee, who grew up in Chinatown and spent many years attending association functions. The largest of these is the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. It consists of more than 50,000 members in the US and Canada. It was founded during the gold rush to help the early Chinese. They continue to work with officials, local officials, to do things like block marijuana shops from coming into Chinatown. And the largest problem they're facing now is who is going to head up the associations over the next few generations, because their own children don't want to take over. You can see many of these are older men, and they are in their 80s and 90s. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Here we have Cecilia Chang. She recently passed away at 100 years old, and she was a very famous restaurateur with a restaurant called the Mandarin. She was known as the Julia Child of Chinese cooking. Back in 1968, she opened the Chinatown's area's first elegant and successful restaurant called the Mandarin. It wasn't in Chinatown, but in Ghirardelli Square. Her son Philip caught the restaurant bug also, and he's the founder of P.F. Chang's, with restaurants all over the world. Now, we said Chinese came back in the mid-1800s, and early on, they were able to bring their families until the 1882 Exclusion Act. When they came, parents were very afraid that their children would lose their language and their culture. So they set up these Chinese schools. Now, today, these Chinese schools still happen all over the United States. The youth early on learned Cantonese, but now the language is Mandarin, the national language of China, even though Cantonese is taught in very few places.
Now, music and dance is also a very important part of Chinese culture in America, as you would guess, and certainly in Chinatown and the surrounding satellite Chinese communities in San Francisco. Everything from the Chinese opera to the Forbidden City Follies to lion dancing is popular and revered. Now, this is a shot from the Chinese Opera. That's setting up the stage at the Chinese Opera. I was able to get permission to come in 3.5 hours before the play goes on, when the performers come in to put on their makeup. And it indeed takes that full 3 hours. It's fascinating to see how they start, and all of the foundation that's put on, and then the painting and the eyebrows. And as you can see here, all the elaborate outfits that go with it. And once you've seen that whole preparation cycle, it does make you appreciate the performance once you see it. And this is from the performance, as you can see here. Another area of music and dance, quite different, is that of the Forbidden City Follies. And the Forbidden, here you see some of the women that perform. As you can tell, they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were performers in the 1970s and 80s during the golden period of nightclubs in Chinatown, and they've gathered together to form the Grand Avenue Follies and to perform again. They do a lot of benefit events, like veterans groups and so on. And when you see them perform, it really is a great reminder that dance and performing is a terrific way to stay young and active and fit. They put on a 80 to 90 minute nonstop performance. And as you can see from this picture, are typically in great shape. Another area, much less formal, of course, is the whole area of lion dancing. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about that.
Now, moving around a 10-pound lion head to mimic a real lion is actually a lot of work, and it takes skill. And as I'm told, if you haven't practiced, you won't even last through an entire parade. So it is a physically demanding job. This is a real favorite of ours. This fellow's name is Corey Chan, and we call him the Lionhead Whisperer. For 40 years, he's been restoring broken and injured lion heads and gives them back their roar. He is self-taught. He replaces the eyelid strings used for blinking. He glues on new fur, and he paints over the scratches until the lion looks brand new. Now, after repairs, Corey tells me, new memories come back to the lion. So aren't these stunning? And I believe Dick had gone and seen all of these in his garage.
Right, his cars have been moved out, and it's filled with lion heads. It's fascinating. So most of us who visit or have visited Chinatown, whether it's San Francisco or maybe New York or Boston or Seattle or elsewhere, know that food is a big part of the cultural experience of going to a Chinatown. And here you see what would be perhaps a typical local restaurant in Chinatown. And you see the ever-present roasted ducks hanging there in the window, which are quite typical in many of the restaurants. Now, in recent years, there's been a number of newer restaurants coming into Chinatown. They were also hit by the shutdown during the pandemic, but now we're beginning to reopen. However, the roasted ducks stay, as you see there. That prior shot and this one are both of a restaurant called China Live. And the chef is quite well known, named George Chen. You can see the kitchen is just immaculate, not what you think of when you think of a kitchen for a typical small basement Chinese restaurant. But here you can see the stainless steel tables, the lighting, the just everything there is first class. This is also from China Live. You see giant steamers where they're doing the dim sum here. And the next one's one of my favorites, a giant chocolate mousse bowl and mixer that this young woman's fixing up for evening, for dinner time. There's another restaurant I mentioned earlier that's similar to China Live in that it's very modern, very contemporary, very upscale, and happens to be a Michelin-starred restaurant called Mr. Jew's. And here you see the interior of Mr. Jew's. And here you see a place setting, a very elegant, contemporary place setting for Mr. Jew's. So there's a real combination of the old traditional restaurants and the new upscale restaurants that are now coming into Chinatown. Here's another one of the new young restaurateurs. Kathy Fang is her name, and she has a restaurant called Fang's, appropriately. Her parents both had a restaurant in Chinatown, in fact, still do. It's been there for a number of decades. So she grew up working in that restaurant, helping prepare vegetables and things. So she knows the restaurant business from the ground up. She's won a number of awards for her innovative and contemporary Chinese cuisine.
Now, this happy employee works at Maoli Shinki, and it's a business of dried meats and poultry, over 100 years old, spanning 7 generations. And I could tell you, I was just there a couple weeks ago, and business is doing well, and their dried meats and sausages are excellent. Now, if you've ever had dried salted fish or ham yi, it is a childhood favorite of mine. When I was little, I stayed at my grandmother's studio SRO apartment near Chinatown, and Papa would steam this atop of rice for breakfast. It is extremely salty, so you just need a little bit of it. I know you're all getting hungry by now. Here's another favorite, coffee crunch cake. It is a specialty at Eastern Bakery in Chinatown. It's only one of 2 bakeries in San Francisco that makes this, and the other one is in Japantown. Now, this is Stockton Street, where you'll see all the poultry and vegetable vendors, and it's considered the locals' Chinatown. And every day at 4 o'clock, little grandmas emerge from their SROs for produce on sale. And the vendors will shout out, "Yat man, yat bao," which means $1, 1 bag. So that's one thing that unites everyone, is that we all love a good bargain. Now, what are these? These are dried roots and fungi. And these are ingredients in healthy family soup recipes. So you take a fistful of this and a fingerful of that, and soup, according to Cantonese tradition, can clear your acne, fortify your qi, and improve your circulation. So a traditional Cantonese mother cooks soup every day for her family. However, that's not me. I'm not a traditional Cantonese mother, but my mom was.
In addition to the restaurants, many of which are small family businesses, and the food markets, there are quite a number of other small family-owned businesses like this one that you see here. This one is called the Wok Shop. And the woman that you see here is Tain Chan. She is 82 years old. She continued to work through the pandemic because fortunately she had gotten help from her son to set up an online business access before this ever hit. And therefore she was able to continue to actually sell her woks and all of her other kitchen gear online. Not as well as without the pandemic, because she normally gets quite a bit of tourist drop-in traffic, but still she's been able to survive, and her business is going to survive. And at 82, she was working 6 or 7 days a week, 4 hours a day. She's a a real character. And if you ever get to San Francisco, the Wok Shop has to be one of your stops. There are quite a number of different businesses. I mentioned an herbalist previously. This is the husband of the Tai Chi master. And we originally were there to photograph him. And as you can see behind him, his storage units with all the herbs that he sells for all the different health remedies. But in addition to that, of course, you find other businesses like the florist. There are several florists there, studio photographer. This fellow happens to have photographs of, I would say, 5 or 6 presidents who have visited Chinatown and all the past governors of California. He's got a very impressive collection of people who have stopped into his shop that he's photographed. Of course, you have to have an acupuncturist, and there are a number of them in Chinatown, as you see the gentleman here. And we were fortunate to be able to meet he and his wife and understand a little more about acupuncture and actually see him perform it on his wife. We were going to have him do it for Kathy, but he said liability insurance would not allow him to do it to someone that hadn't signed all the waivers. So he did it with his wife, who was quite happy to do that. There are some businesses that cater very much to tourism, like this one. This is a tea tasting. There are several tea tasting rooms. This young woman does a fantastic job of, explaining the different teas, and they have a really vast supply of teas that they can bring out for you to taste of all different varieties, and to give you hints on how to serve it, how to steep it. But that's a very fun thing if you're in Chinatown, just to stop in and take an hour to go through that process. Other traditional tourist businesses are like the antiquities and the jade carving shops as well. They're struggling a bit because of online competition now, because you can also access many of these goods online, and that's been difficult. In addition to the very traditional businesses, you also see some new contemporary businesses like this one. This is the gift shop at China Live. The woman you see here is a co-owner of China Live with her husband. This is Cindy Chan, and she personally curated all the items in the gift shop. She traveled to China, other parts of Asia, Europe, and elsewhere around the world, gathering what she thought was some of the best, highest quality, most unique, most attractive kitchenwares and related gift items. It's a fantastic gift shop. Here's another new entrepreneurial enterprise. It's called Kim Plus Ono. So as you can tell, a takeoff on the word kimono. And they sell hand-printed silk clothing items and other accessories. Again, very, very high quality, very attractive, very contemporary stores, you can see. They happen to be holding a Crazy Rich Asians lookalike contest when I was in doing the photo shoot. And this happens to be one of the young women customers who came in dressed up based on the movie Crazy Rich Asians. You can see the some of the hand-printed silk that she's looking at there. And this is the final picture. It also happens to be the back cover of the book. And there's a particular reason why we chose this for the back cover of the book. We thought it really represents, in a way, symbolically Chinatown today. So you have, of course, a young Chinese woman in a sort of a contemporary artwork, a graphic arts kind of artwork. So obviously very modern with a camera, something very common today, but she's wearing a very traditional red Chinese dress. And we thought this was a great blend of tradition and contemporary vibe. And the fact that she's sort of looking forward and looking at you rather than looking back is representative of a Chinatown that honors its traditions and its history, but is also very much looking forward to being around for generations to follow. It's been there 170 years. And I think it has the resilience and the community spirit to be there for decades to come. Now, at this point, we would love to answer some questions. I know that I think Marjorie has actually been watching to see if there were any questions that came up on the screen. And I know she has some questions herself that she had put together that she had already alerted us to. So we're prepared to respond to those, Marjorie, and or any other questions that anyone has posed or would like to pose now. So please go on your screen and type in a question if you have one. But let me throw it over to Marjorie to go ahead with questions.
Okay, I think I saw from the screen, there's a two question. Most of the surrounding, everybody seems very interesting for all the produce, where all those vendors come from. And another question is related to, with all those beautiful store, they just wanted to know, is that there's an online store sale for those beautiful silk or whatever the item is. Oh, I can see that the interest was in that area.
Right.
And I don't know how all those stores really set up. Do they branch out to?
Let me start with an
online?
answer. Let me start with an answer, and then I'm sure Kathy can elaborate in much greater detail. But Kim Plus Ono, for example, yes, does have an online store for sure. They're very modern, very contemporary. I think they do a fair amount of business online, and it's Kim Plus Ono, Kim plus sign ONO. So if you go online, for sure, you'll find their website and you'll find them. So I would say many of the stores do, but a number of the family, more traditional stores did not, and it caused them to suffer more in the downturn. But Kathy, one question is, where do people get the produce?
Yeah, go ahead, Kathy. That's fine.
Okay, so where do people get their produce? Well, the vendors get their produce delivered to them every day, Monday through Friday. So, and even Saturday. And these come from farms that are maybe like 2 or 3 hours away. So the produce is extremely fresh, and you'll find more of the Asian produce there, as well as regular apples and oranges, but you'll find dragon fruit, rambutan, donut peaches, and it's just a really fun opportunity to try something new. So next time you're in Chinatown, at any Chinatown, I challenge you, try something new, just for fun.
Yeah, I can supplement a little bit, because one time I lived very close to the Stockton Street in San Francisco, because I live in the Seacrest, I think, in an area. My son was lived there. So every day I walk to that street to go through all the produce store. And that was really wonderful. I think Chinese love to eat much more fresh vegetable and fruit. And that's the kind of tradition. So that's why they very emphasize on the good produce.
Just to ask an additional question about that. Do you think that the businesses, the restaurants, hotels, that sort of thing, do they also go out shopping in the produce markets the old-fashioned way, like we see on all the cooking shows, or are they more like they have wholesale relationships with some of these farms and places and get their food that way?
A lot of them they just go and to Stockton Street, just as I showed you, and the chefs will go out there. George Chen took me out there. I mean, he's got this, 4-star Chinese restaurant, and he loves, he said, why would I go anywhere else? You know, because they're not big enough to have the trucks roll into their individual restaurant. So it's all there, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot. So, and then these little old ladies I talked about that go every day. I mean, you remember that their apartments are really small, so they don't have a refrigerator, right? So then they just go and buy for the day. And that's how it was like in Hong Kong and stuff like that, that the places that you live are so tiny and packed that you just buy enough for the day and you make it. And you go out again the next day. And it's kind of a fun activity, I think.
Okay. I have another question. And where there's any surprise moment when you're doing the book creation, like all the photography and all the interview, you know, maybe you can share some of the experience with us.
Go ahead, Dick.
Well, generally, I will say people were very open and welcoming. One thing we did as part of this, and of course, myself being non-Asian, I was very sensitive to the fact that I needed some credibility to be able to get people to open up. And this was the third book I've done on a San Francisco neighborhood. The one prior to this was on the Latino district on the Mission. So I learned quite a bit there on the importance of having people who are in the community, who know what you're doing, who can introduce you to people. So early on, I spent a fair amount of time making contacts and being introduced to people. And then Kathy joined me, and of course, she already had her own contacts. And together we had a number of people like Maggie Wong that I mentioned, who is a moon goddess and a television broadcaster who became a contact for us and contacted many people. So we pretty much had introductions in many cases, which limited the surprises. One surprise that we had, Kathy showed a picture of Cecilia Chang, the famous restaurateur who passed away last year at 100. We were given an address to visit her and take some photos in her, what we were told was a penthouse apartment. And we showed up at the address, and sure enough, the number was on the door and we were on the right street. And we could hear some kind of music playing upstairs, but it was a pretty dilapidated neighborhood. And we rang the doorbell and nobody answered, and we rang again. And her granddaughter had put this together and organized it for us. And so we called her on the cell phone, and she said, "Oh, well, I'll call her and tell her you're downstairs." So she did. And then, still nobody coming down. And this granddaughter had said, "Well, the doorman will come greet you." Well, it didn't look like there was any doorman where we were. Finally, we called back, and to make a long story short, we discovered they had given us the wrong address, and we were exactly 10 blocks away. And then we went to the correct location across from a beautiful park. 2 doormen met us. It was quite a different experience than we had waiting there. So that was a surprise. I mentioned it was a big surprise when we found out that the herbalist's wife was a master in Tai Chi and had all these trophies and was renowned for her Tai Chi skills. And it's just not something you expected. But there were many interesting, but mostly all pleasant surprises. I'm trying to think if we had any bad experiences. I can't think of any right now. Where we upset anybody or anybody yelled at us or
no,
anything like that. No,
everyone was really. We had the little girl we took pictures of. She ran away from us, so we had.
Oh, that's true.
She ran away. She got tired of us taking pictures of her, and so she says, I'm gonna go find my mom." And then she just like ran. It was raining that day, so I'm trying to chase after her. I was really scared, but we found her back at her mom's restaurant enjoying a nice little drink. So that was a little surprise. case. Oh, and then there was the acupuncturist. Another surprising thing, it turned out he was also a Chinese opera singer. So before we left, he started singing Chinese opera for us in his acupuncturist. So that was pretty funny. So
That was
more funny
great.
things, nothing bad.
Right. Well, I do got a couple people, they prefer to ask the question themselves. So how we just gonna be let them unmute their sound so they can ask you directly.
Laura, can you unmute Ina?
I think one is Ina Demer, D-E-M-E-R-S.
Or you mean the ones in the chat, Marjorie?
Yeah, in the question and answer session.
Sure,
Yeah.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
you can talk.
I get it.
Okay.
I have it unmuted.
Yeah, and I think another person is
Oh,
Karen
right, I see.
Marcy. Yeah. So if you think you can unmute, and yeah, that would be great. So we can kind of have a little bit more dialogue too.
Karen or Karen?
Okay, I have my mic unmuted now. My question was about the buildings in Chinatown. You said that Caucasian engineers built them. However, I have known that, sometimes the Chinese people are planning, building, and do everything else, but then the credit would go to, the Caucasian people. So I'm wondering if this was authentically, their engineering skills, or, how sometimes Asian people are being undermined. And this is not just now, but before, during the railroad, everything else, So I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if,
Well, the buildings that are this traditional Chinese architecture, like the ones with the pagodas and the elaborate facades and so on, these were all built about between 1908 and early 1920s. And the historical accounts that we looked at, including written by some of the Chinese historians from Chinatown, are pretty consistent in saying that they were designed by Caucasian architects and builders, but based off of photographs and pictures and drawings, but with some input from Chinese architects. So that's what that's what the historians, including the Chinese historians, seem to be saying. Now, of course, now with some of the new facilities being modernized and so on, just for example, China Live, in which they put, I believe the number is $20 million into China Live, into the facility. Of course, that was, all by George Chen and Cindy Chen oversaw all of that in terms of doing that. But I think at least that period of 1908 to the 1920s probably was mostly Caucasian architects and builders based on Chinese designs.
I also wanted to add that there was a significant labor pool of laborers that probably did participate in building Chinatown, as also in addition to the financial district and other commercial buildings throughout San Francisco as like basic labor.
Mm-hmm.
you mean the Asian people as basic labor?
Yeah.
Yes, back in when after the earthquake, because you had the Chinese miners originally, and then they worked on the railroad, and then you had many laborers that still had a lot of the skill set to help out in actual, pouring concrete and hammering and that type of stuff.
Yeah, because even the railroad building from the east to the west or from the west to the east is not being credited to the Asian people. And that's my concern. And it needs to come out somehow.
It has
Yeah,
come out
yeah.
there's been a lot of work. In fact, there's a national labor department, and they give historic record. And so actually within the last 10 years, they did give a particular plaque dedicated to the Chinese who worked on the railroad. So these things are happening, and there's also plaques along the railroad in some certain towns that give Chinese credit. So it's not like they're not getting any credit. They are getting credit, but it's not talked about. It's not played up in the media.
Yeah, okay, right. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Oh.
this is Karen. So my question was, what we're seeing here on the East Coast of Boston and New York City Chinatowns is that with the real estate prices, a lot of stores, restaurants are moving out of the Chinatown. And I'm just wondering, do you think that will ever happen in San Francisco? Because I love San Francisco's Chinatown. It's a huge, it's got lots of things, lots of activities. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But what do you foresee?
Yeah, well, one thing that's fairly unique about San Francisco's Chinatown is that it's quite a clearly defined boundary. You know, I mentioned it, I think it's 24, 25 square blocks. It's 3 blocks wide and 8 blocks long, basically. Now there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of ethnic Chinese who live outside of Chinatown in the Bay Area. But it has retained, it's quite remarkable. One thing that struck me is I went to the top of the Hilton, which is right across Kearny Street from Chinatown. I got permission to go to the rooftop and take photos from like 30 floors up, aerial shots of Chinatown. And when you look at it from 30 floors up, it is absolutely clear where the boundaries of Chinatown are. They are maximum typically 5 or 6 story buildings. The architecture is unique. And then you see, 30-story high rises right across the street in the Union Square area, financial district, and Nob Hill. And that really struck me. And I asked myself, why has it not been developed? How did they resist this? And I mentioned it's a very tight-knit community. Most of the property in Chinatown is owned by Chinese. I think that's part of it. The family associations own their buildings. They rent out retail space. Chinese entrepreneurs and real estate people, real estate managers and investors own much of that property. So I think, that close-knit nature of the community is what's really prevented it from being developed. And I think it's probably as simple as it's been a lot easier for developers to go across Market Street to, south of Market or something where there's no resistance to development, rather than trying to tear down this historically significant Chinatown and build high rises. So there's quite a history behind that. And what will happen in the future? Well, many Chinese have already moved out of Chinatown. I mean, Kathy is a good example. You never lived in Chinatown. In fact, your family moved out. But there are strong ties to Chinatown from those who live in West Portal or Clement Street, just to name 2 areas that have a high concentration of ethnically Chinese citizens. And yet they may come in to do their shopping, their grocery shopping, their vegetables, and come in for cultural events. So there's a really strong network coming for the family association. And that's what struck me as the strength and resilience of that network that's developed over 170 years, dealing with discrimination, having fought off one attempt to force them to move out to the outskirts of the city and having succeeded. So, and I hear that with the people that we talked with, who are quite dedicated to trying to keep it this unique enclave. And one of the purposes in doing the book, in fact, was like with the Mission District as well, to try to highlight what a cultural treasure it is, give people pride in it, give them identity in it, and try to convince people both in Chinatown and elsewhere that it's worth preserving, that there's significance and meaningfulness to preserving it and understanding it.
That's really a great answer. Thank you so much, Richard. for that.
Kathy may be able to give, her perspective is undoubtedly different than mine on this.
I think the only thing I have to add on that is this pandemic has really, it's affected Chinatown in more than a financial way. It's affected it emotionally, and has discouraged so many of the merchants. They're so discouraged. So now they're regrouping, they're opening. The restaurants are not open every day. Some are choosing to do Wednesday through Saturday. I went there recently. I was trying to take my mom to a few of my favorite places. Several of them weren't open on that Tuesday I was there, so they're like picking and choosing. Maybe they're opening just at night because they're really having to figure all this stuff out, right? Like, okay, how do I hire a worker? Do I just do it? So there's just so much stress on them. And then on top of that, with any hate crimes that saunter into Chinatown, so they're under a lot of stress. But they're hanging tough. They're hanging tough. So I think this year is going to really be very telling in terms of what's going to happen to 25, at least 25 of these shops they just pulled the gates, and it'll be very telling. Gentrification's always been a threat for Chinatown, but Chinatown has had so many wonderful advocates. There's over 200 nonprofits that somehow overlap with Chinatown and serve the residents. So I think all eyes are on the Chinatowns all over the US right now. So and there's a lot of public support, but for the merchant that has his little gift shop at Christmas, I tried to get all my gifts from Chinatown and give them to my friends, because there are wonderful things, beautiful things in these little souvenir shops. So I think going in there personally and just encouraging them. So if wherever you're at, you folks in Maine, go to your Chinese restaurant, go to the little shop, just tell them, hang in there, you're doing great, because I think emotionally people need a lift,
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, let's follow Cassie's talk, because I got a comment from Marina Wang, and that's in the chat. She said the hate of the Asian society in San Francisco is very dangerous right now. So she was put a comment saying, well, Richard and Cassie and me, it was a very great reminder of the history of a Chinese contribution to San Francisco. That was great. So we really need to emphasize this. What is the Chinese contribution, to San Francisco, not just to San Francisco, really to USA, okay? It's quite a lot. So that was a wonderful comment. Thank you, Marina.
Of course, when we started the book project, we had no idea that we were going to go through the coronavirus pandemic.
No.
And yet it's turned out in a way to be very timely, because it came out just as we were shutting down due to the pandemic. And for people who have participated in it, and just by the way, I think on the screen now you see the 3 different neighborhoods that the books that I've worked on, put together, the Chinatown, the Mission, and then Haight-Ashbury being the third, in reverse order. Haight-Ashbury was first, then the Mission, and then Chinatown. But as Kathy and we promised everybody that we interviewed they would get a copy of the book or that we took a photo of. So when we got copies, we went around Chinatown and delivered copies. And I think, Laura, I think we actually have a couple shots of that at the very end where people are holding the book with their picture in it. If you could maybe pull a couple of those up. But there were signing books there. But if you go to the very end, that's Cecilia Chang. Yeah. Kathy and this was almost the cover.
That's a little girl that ran away from us.
That's the little girl that ran away from us. This is a drone. Oh, this is Miss Chinatown. Yeah. We can assure you no seagulls were harmed as part of this book project.
I love that. My daughter does archery, and so this is just Chinese, and
Right.
that's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that girl.
Yeah. This was one of my favorite pictures, and
That
it's not
is my favorite.
it's
I have
not
to
in the
say.
book. And the reason it's
Wow.
not in the book was I didn't get her name when we took this, and we tried and tried. Nobody was able to identify her. And so obviously we're not going to put her in the
Right.
book without permission. So
Yeah.
when we do presentations to people here, we will sometimes use this and say, if you know who this is, let us know. But if you keep going, Laura, I think, well, here you see, this is, a month or two ago, how empty the streets were. Yeah. They're starting to come back now that San Francisco's opening up. And then I think you'll see a shot or two. Yeah. So for example, this is one of these young 8th graders that was dressed up in Monkey King costume. I think he's the one on the left. So you see him in costume there, and then you see him with his book.
Mhm.
And the reaction we got from people receiving a book like this with their picture in it, you can see Kathy and I have signed the book there, is just fantastic. Here you see Maggie Wong. She said we had to schedule a time to give her book because she needed a day to get ready in costume.
Makeup.
And put on her makeup.
Oh,
It's funny.
Yeah, right.
Hmm.
And I think,
Wow.
even the
Yeah. The
lion,
lion got a little
the
attention.
lion, yeah. So we had dozens of these where we delivered them, and everybody, and this was during the pandemic when we were out delivering them. People felt so good about something positive and the positive portrayal of Chinatown.
Wow, you have such a beautiful photos. I hope most of it's all in your book. So now we
Well, a
just
lot
have
of
to
them
see
are, and
Where are we gonna be ordered that book?
Yeah.
well,
Gotta get your own book.
go to the
Absolutely.
book website,
Right.
Okay.
which is ChinatownBookSF.com.
Yeah.
So go to ChinatownBookSF.com. You'll see a lot more photos, by the way. So you get to see a lot more of them, more than are in the book. And it has instructions on how to order it. But you can also just, you can go to Amazon and
Yeah. San Francisco's Chinatown. It's a very nice, easy title to, there it is. Okay, there's the link there.
Oh,
for
that's
people.
good. Yeah.
ChinatownBookSF.com at the very
Yeah.
bottom. Yeah.
I would also encourage everybody who's feeling like I am, like after a year of sitting in my house in cold Maine, I feel like I just took a trip to the Bay Area. If you, obviously what both Kathy and Dick have said about supporting not only local Asian businesses, but all the wonderful Chinatowns around the country. Certainly Boston for us is our closest large Chinatown. But if you have not, I mean, I think there are some people on this this presentation who are right out in California, but if you are have not been to San Francisco Chinatown, you really have to put it on your list when you start getting up in the air again, because it is just amazing. There's nothing like it in the entire country. And I'm really happy and relieved to hear about the ways you feel that Chinatown is somewhat insulated from being wiped out, gentrified, you know, that there's still such a strong population, residential population, business community. You know, obviously it's very exciting to tourists and a lot of international tourists, which we'll eventually come back to, but that the area, you know, with, I'm sure some very big struggles over the last year in particular, but that it's still so vibrant and thriving as a community with, you know, education, business, culture, everything is just a great, personally, a relief to me, because the last time I was in the Bay Area, it just looked like so many of the tech giants were just really encroaching in with all the, you know, just San Francisco just looked like a construction zone with all the stuff going up and in. And then you have this, you know, this beautiful little, you know, area. Well, it's not that little, you know, this area that seems so distinctly intact and thriving. And it's just great to see. And also your presentation brought up so many of the very contemporary, like the sort of Asian fusion and more contemporary upscale Chinese restaurants and the boutiques and lines by younger product and, you know, textile people, and that kind of energy and sort of new and fresh things going in the mix with, you know, the small shop owners, the small tea owners, the medicinal owners that, you know, that have been there, you know, the fortune, you know, the places that have been there for many, many, many years. To me, that's a sign that people are looking to the future and finding ways to sort of carry on into the next era of Chinatown, which will be a mix of the very traditional and of course the religious and all the different factions, but also this fresh, you know, younger Chinese going. And
One of the things that's really, really cool is that you saw the gal, the slide of the gal doing the tea tasting.
yeah,
And she took over, she was in finance, and she came back to take over her dad's shop because he was ill. And she just totally renovated it. You know, I mean, it's still the tea shop. She said the clientele is different. So when her dad was in business, people knew their teas. They
Mhm.
came down for their favorite oolong. They were all locals. They came for their regular pickup of teas.
Mhm.
But she said the new customer are the tourists. They don't know tea. And so she is really into tea education now.
Mhm.
And she's also done corporate accounts. Google is one of her corporate accounts.
Oh
So
boy.
but she grew up understanding the business because of her family. And then she's giving it a new spin to make it successful.
Mhm.
The same thing with Kim and Omo. The girl who owns it is Tiffany. And her parents owned like 5 souvenir stores in Chinatown. So she grew up behind the cash register.
Mhm.
And so when she started her store, she said, I don't want to make it cluttered. I don't think my generation wants that kind of thing. So she curated it so it's more like a Western boutique. So these new entrepreneurs, they grew up here, and they grew up with their parents, and they're giving it a new spin, and that's very refreshing to see.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's another question by Phoebe Shea. I wonder that you want to ask yourself, Phoebe Shea. Well, she's already off. Oh, maybe she's gone. Yeah, she was asked,
Oh, there she is.
oh, okay, good, good. So then this way you can ask yourself, that would be great, instead of for me to reading your questions.
Yes, my name is Scott and I'm Phoebe's husband and we're watching together on a laptop. So I actually asked the question, and the question is, are most children residents of Chinatown and young Chinese Americans in the greater San Francisco area generally still interested in learning to speak, read, and write Chinese today?
I think the parents are, the parents drive that pretty much. It's not gonna, you don't have kids saying, hey, I want to learn Chinese. It's the parents that are driving it. And the Chinese schools that are not just from Chinatown, that there used to be a lot in Chinatown. There's quite a few, but many of the Asian Americans are throughout the Bay Area. So you have Chinese schools throughout the Bay Area. Wherever there's large populations of Chinese, you'll see a plethora of Chinese schools. And so most today in the Bay Area, most of the children that are born, they're not in Chinatown. Chinatown is mostly elderly at this point.
Yeah.
And there are more than Chinese young people learning Chinese. We have two grandsons who are in a bilingual or trilingual school, and they're learning Spanish, Chinese, and English, of course.
Right.
And that's not uncommon to see, because San Francisco has such a significant relationship with China and Asia. I think a number of Caucasian, maybe Latino families are thinking it wouldn't be bad to have some knowledge of Chinese as well. And of course, Chinatown in San Francisco was originally and is still heavily Cantonese, right?
Yeah.
Not Mandarin. So today the schools are teaching Mandarin. So even the Cantonese Chinese young people are getting some value learning Mandarin as separate from speaking Cantonese at home, say.
Right.
Being in a global economy, and so many companies are now doing business with China, many people see that's such a great asset to learn Mandarin.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we really round up all the questions I have?
Yeah, I think
Well,
we're close to wrapping up here, right?
yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
And do we want to talk about who has the most interesting question give out today? I'm not sure. So
I know.
Jennifer, you have to figure that out.
I know.
No, we are talking about, we have one free book as
Yeah.
a prize.
Yeah.
Going to be given to the person ask the most interesting questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
We may have to take an offline vote, Marjorie. And
Okay. All right.
I think I've got
We have to do all
everybody
that.
here who's,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to add, Kathy or Dick? Are we in a good place here? This has been just fascinating, and again, hope everyone will get the book for themselves, and also, it's a wonderful gift as well. So we're just so thrilled to have some West Coast vibe here. Share, people who haven't spent a lot of time on the West Coast or have family, in Maine, it's hard to be aware of how incredibly diverse the Bay Area is, and how many, when you talk about like language schools and that sort of thing, I mean, anywhere where there are Chinese communities, which is, a lot of places all up and down the peninsula, and, and of course in Southern Cal too. So it's great to have this sort of snapshot of what's a real central focus certainly in Northern California for the Chinese community.
One question that I saw, and it popped up again, was, is there an ebook version of this book? And the answer is no, not per se, but the website that we gave you the coordinates for earlier is in effect an ebook version, and it's even bigger than that because it has all the, I think all the photos, or virtually all the photos, plus twice as many in the photo section. It has a stories section, the stories that Kathy wrote from the interviews. And again, less than half of those are in the book. So there are more on the website. And those might be fascinating because there's articles, very short, but well-written, concise articles about everything from Miss Chinatown to the walk shop to SROs and so on. So go to the website, and I think you'll find a lot there. And we've done, I think, nearly 40 book talks by now, virtual book talks. And the upside of doing them virtually rather than in person is that we can actually do it with people like you across the country, which is fabulous. Because otherwise, if we were doing in-person book talks, it would all be geographically constrained.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful to be able to host you. Thank you for the invitation. Talk to your friends in Boston, get them to set something up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do have ties in Chinatown and different, communities down there. And of course, you see that our group is perhaps smaller but strong. We have lots of curiosity. We have lots of, passion and interest, and stick-to-itiveness to, bringing cultural, interesting things to Maine, and also just keeping our community linked together and sharing experiences and moving forward. So yeah, so I hope you'll stay in touch with our organization, and certainly if you are on the East Coast, you're welcome to come by too. Or if you're here around Lunar New Year, come
Right.
give a talk at our event, which will be live this year, or 20. Let's hope 2022.
You have
Yeah.
a building?
We actually, well, Marjorie, you want to explain?
Yeah, I think 1 year I attending, that was wonderful. They cafe renting a middle school building, which is they have a big auditorium, and we can set up all those variety stands. Everybody can browse through. Then we have another whole stage performance. We got a very good performance from Boston. Okay, they have very beautiful dancers, acrobat, or whatever. That was my first year. Moved to Maine. I never even know this place exists.
We went up a notch, and it's a good thing we did it. We were right, it was weeks before everything fell apart. Yeah,
that was because that was before COVID. So
yeah.
I was
just
very
before.
fortunate.
It was a touch and go, but we made it. And it's a site that's great. It has one of those, how these schools now have these amazing performing arts centers. They used to be in colleges, now they're in high schools and middle schools. So we have a performance side, we have classrooms to give workshops, we have open air areas in like the gymnasium where I take my craft book and promote crafts and other vendors and things, and food, of course. And so we try to, I think for a lot of cities and towns, that's the biggest event of the year, or, it's the biggest holiday. But and then we do have a really good Moon Festival too, which is usually at a different location. And with performances and song and obviously mooncakes, food, big potluck. So we do, but we're kind of like rejiggering now. We've had a year of being virtual as an organization, and we've had time to really talk and reflect. And then of course, all these really urgent things came up to really address all the, the violence and things that we really need to respond to and get out in the streets and deal with, and support our Asian communities and everybody, I mean, this affects everybody. And now we're sort of rejiggering back to what is the next year going to look like, get into an event cycle again, bring more membership in, bring more to the board, and just kind of resume, but maybe in a new and different way. So so that's kind of where we are. But
one suggestion that you might consider following up on is our partner in this project, from a community standpoint, is the Chinese Culture Center.
Mhm.
And they are one of those 200 nonprofits, and one of the leading ones that is doing quite a bit to try to help the Chinese community deal with, the violence and some of the hate issues.
Mhm.
As their primary focus is on art. So they're promoting young Chinese American artists, and but they're trying to promote understanding and healing through art.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're a beneficiary. They get some of the royalty and some of the and they sell books themselves. They have a gift shop and they sell a number of things, but they are selling books as well. And so we've been able to benefit them financially. But as an organization, you might find it just interesting to talk with them about what they're doing
Mhm.
in their community to try to deal with the issues that we face, and to help the community. And I think they're written up, aren't they, Kathy,
Yeah.
on
In
our
fact,
website?
as we're speaking, they're hosting a poetry reading like right now,
Yeah.
and sharing time on
Yeah.
Zoom. So they're doing both Zoom activities as well as public activities at Portsmouth.
Great. We will definitely explore that. And if there's anyone in particular, Dick, feel free to offline. If there's somebody that would be great to contact there.
Well,
To contact, that would be good.
executive director is Jenny Leong, and it's
Leung.
Leung, different than Kathy's.
Mhm.
And it's Jenny, Jenny.
Okay.
So this cultural center is in San Francisco, Chinatown.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's actually maybe 150 feet from Chinatown, because it's actually
Oh, okay.
in
All
the
right.
Hilton Hotel
In the
across
hotel.
Kearny Street.
Oh,
But
okay. Yeah.
they
I know where that
control
is.
the Kearny Street Bridge, which goes to Portsmouth Square.
Okay.
And in
Okay.
fact, I think their history of being there is they actually got a favorable lease rate because of a dispute over development of property where some Filipino and Chinese immigrants got kicked out and so on. So anyway, that's why they're there. But
Okay.
so yeah, they're a couple hundred feet from Portsmouth Square.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Very
and
good.
they have, of course, they've been closed as well, but they have some art exhibition space in their one floor of the Hilton there on the third floor. And then in Chinatown itself, I think it's Ross Alley, isn't it? They have a storefront called 43 Ross, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's where they also put on exhibitions right in one of the alleys in Chinatown.
Terrific.
Okay, that was great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Laura, do you think you could get us the recording? Would you be able to share that with us? We have one visitor here asking if it's going to be available after the presentation, and I see your recording. So if there's a way to have